This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 550 of the Late Round Podcast, one of many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Last week's show had its good and bad moments. On the bad side, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Anthony Schwartz, and Adam Troutman, they were all goose eggs. They did nothing. Those were massive, massive misses. But I'm pretty happy about calling out Hunter Renfroe in his matchup against Pittsburgh. He had a 19% target share. James White once again was good. Sterling Shepard was good. Teddy Bridgewater and Tim Patrick, they were both solid. And the high-rostered players to sit, they were all pretty good calls. Overall, still a worse week than I'd like for this sleeper show, but there were definitely some positives. I just need some of these guys that I talk about to find the end zone a little bit more. That's been the biggest problem to start the year. Now, before getting into this week's sleepers, one of the biggest games of week 3 is the Monday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. And FanDuel is making it even bigger by giving new customers 30-1 odds on either team to win. FanDuel is sports betting made simple, and they're always hooking you up with great offers. Plus, when you win, you'll get paid in as little as 24 hours. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today and bet on the Eagles-Cowboys game. See for yourself why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Must be 21 years or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. New users only. $10 first deposit required. Must wager in designated offered market. Max bonus $150. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Restrictions apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Virginia. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Tennessee Redline 1-800-889-9789. Visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia or call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. That's a new disclaimer. I did it all in one take. Let's get to these sleepers. As we do each week, we'll kick things off this week with 5 players who are rostered in 25 to 50% of Yahoo leagues who you can consider starting. What I'm beginning to realize is that a bigger and bigger gap is being created in the percent roster numbers at running back. There just aren't many running backs in general who are rostered in like the 20 to 50% range. So at times on this show, I'm going to have to be slightly more lenient in order to talk about the position. I don't think anyone wants me to just talk about wide receivers and quarterbacks. So let's kick things off this week with Cordarrelle Patterson, who's rostered in just over half of Yahoo leagues. I talked about him on the 15 transactions episode and how he dug into Mike Davis's workload even more in week 2 than he did in week 1. Davis is still the priority there, but Patterson saw 39% of Atlanta's running back rushes with a 13% target share in week 2. Those aren't bad numbers for a flex option in a 12-team league. Now he gets the Giants. The Falcons and Giants have actually run at pretty fast paces to start the year. But even if you want to chalk that up to a small sample size, the game has a 48.5 point over-under, which is decent for this slate. This may seem like I'm just chasing points from last week, but really Patterson has a role in this offense. If you're hurting, I can understand starting him in week 3. Another running back in this tier who you could consider starting is Kenneth Gainwell. I know I talked about him last week, and he only got 7.2 PPR points. But looking beyond that final tally, his numbers were actually not bad. He ended up seeing 13% of the team's targets and a 32% running back rush share in what ended up being a negative game script for Philadelphia. The matchup this week against Dallas could feature another negative game script. At the very least, there could be a good bit of scoring given the 51.5 point over-under in this game. Dallas is a cakier matchup for the Eagles than the 49ers were, and the team is a top 10 one in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position to start the year. More importantly, they're 6th in adjusted target share allowed to running backs. That just looks at target share allowed to positions and then adjusts for competition. Those are all small samples. I get it. If you want to dumb this recommendation down, it's really that Gainwell is the 3rd down back on a team that could be in a high-scoring game environment as an underdog. That's why he's not a bad waiver wire type play. Let's talk about my favorite traditional streamer this week, Daniel Jones. I talked up Jones on the 15 transactions episode because of what he's doing with his legs. And while I don't expect it to keep up to this degree, you have to at least like him against the Falcons. They've given up 2 top 5 performances to quarterbacks this year. Yes, I understand both of those quarterbacks were good. But the Atlanta secondary has done nothing to make me change my perception of them entering the year. They're not good. Jones has the rushing upside already, and now he might be able to get it done with his arm. So I like Danny Dimes as a top streamer in week 3. Now, I was going to talk about Derek Carr here as another streamer, but I think people would probably get more out of this show if I just talked about Justin Fields. He's just on the edge of this tier in terms of percent rostered. Fields is right there with Daniel Jones as an option this week. I like Jones's matchup more, but I can't deny the upside that Justin Fields brings. There's a reason I was talking him up and Trey Lance up this offseason. Even just this past week, Fields ran the ball 10 times in about 2.5 quarters. He's going to bring that element to this offense, and he's likely going to throw it deep at a higher rate than Andy Dalton has been. Because Dalton's thrown it 15 or more air yards at the lowest rate in the league to start the year. Now the question is, what type of quarterback should you play over Justin Fields? There are about 10 or 11 really good options this week, and they're the 10 or 11 typical plug-and-play starters. Right after those players is when you get to Daniel Jones, and Fields belongs right there. And after some thought, I think Fields is the better play than Daniel Jones. Now, there's some risk in that, but the reward seems to be there. If you'd rather just play it safe based off of what you've seen this year, you could go with Daniel Jones. That's fine. I wouldn't fault you because the Bears' offensive line could struggle this weekend. But I would probably play Fields over players like Teddy Bridgewater, who's a popular streamer, Ryan Tannehill, Sam Darnold, Derek Carr, and Kirk Cousins. Again, your risk tolerance might be different, but Fields should have a floor given what he can do as a rusher. It's a pretty good week in general for quarterbacks, so I can understand if you have a better option, but I'd put Fields in fringe QB1 territory. Now, the last player in this tier that I want to get to is Jared Cook. He didn't have a great week 2 performance, but he did get a touchdown called back. He's now one of 14 tight ends across the league with a 15% target share or better to start the year. And that's on a team that's been top 10 in the league so far this year in neutral script pass rate. Against the Chiefs in a game that could shoot out, he's a great tight end option. I think it's more than reasonable to want to play Jared Cook over guys like Noah Fant or Dallas Goedert this week. The next tier of players rostered in 10 to 24% of Yahoo leagues is all wide receivers this week. The first one is Sammy Watkins. Watkins is one of just 9 wide receivers with a 25% target share in each of his first 2 games. He has a 28% target share in the Ravens offense. Now, he hasn't done a whole lot with that volume. He's finished as the wide receiver 39 and the wide receiver 56 over these 2 weeks. That's partially because the Ravens are the run heaviest team in the league right now, but also because Watkins just hasn't found the end zone. Maybe that changes this week. In week 2, Detroit was just daring the Packers to run on them. They were asking for it. They wanted the Packers to utilize Aaron Jones. They can't do that against Baltimore. The Lions are also thin at cornerback right now, making Watkins an even more attractive play. I think there's some fear that this game just favors the Ravens heavily, but the Lions offense has shown signs of life in weeks 1 and 2. That at least could keep things moderately competitive for the Ravens passing attack. A player I keep bringing up on these shows is Emmanuel Sanders. I like him this week against Washington, a team that's underperformed defensively to start the year. Sanders has an 18% target share in that Bills offense. He's tied for 3rd in the NFL in 15-plus air yard targets, and he leads the Bills in that category. Now, as I said earlier this week, Josh Allen has struggled on deep balls to start the year. But we can't just assume that continues. It wouldn't surprise me if they were able to connect on a big play in this contest as a result. Let's hope that regression hits. Jalen Reagor has seen 20% of Philadelphia's targets to start the year. He was strong in week 1 with a 17-point performance, but in week 2, the whole Philly offense just struggled against San Francisco. Again, they should have a better time against Dallas. And if that script gets out of hand in any way, more dropbacks could result in more overall passing volume for the Eagles. Because that could be an issue this year. Currently, they have a pass rate under 50% in total, and their pass-to-rush ratio in neutral game scripts is below average. Let's hope Dallas can move the ball offensively against the Eagles to force more passing volume in the Eagles' offense. And if you've got Devontae Smith, you've got to absolutely love him in week 3. I didn't talk about KJ Osborne on the 15 transactions episode this week because it's hard for me to go super hard for a player who's not going to surpass the top 2 options on his own team. But we can't ignore what's going on there. Osborne has seen a 19% target share in each of the first 2 games played this season. According to Pro Football Focus, he's run 71 routes this year, whereas Adam Thielen's at 85 and Justin Jefferson's at 84. Now he gets Seattle, not a scary secondary. and it's in a game at home that's projected to be close, and it has a 55.5 point over-under. You'll want exposure to that game, and Osborne is a cheap way to do it. And then the last wideout in this tier, AJ Green. We can hate on Green all we want, but he's comfortably run the second most routes on that Cardinals team this year. And he's seen 18% of Kyler Murray's targeted throws. And now he gets Jacksonville. The Cardinals have a team total that's approaching 30 this week. And the Jags have allowed the 9th most adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers. I think you could do worse than AJ Green if you're looking at players in this tier. This is the fun part of the show. Players rostered in fewer than 10% of leagues that most people aren't even thinking about starting. We haven't had a ton of hits yet in this tier this season, but with more data should come better results. Let's start with one last quarterback streamer, Jimmy Garoppolo. The 49ers face the Packers. It's a defense that's really struggled to start the season. The 49ers have an implied team total of 26.5 according to FanDuel Sportsbook. And I really think that this is a get-right game for George Kittle. The Packers have given up a huge target share to tight ends to start the season. And it's not just because they faced TJ Hawkinson. In week 1, Adam Troutman and Jawan Johnson, they did work against the Packers as well. So far this year, and again, this is a sample size alert because we only have 2 games, but so far this year, 26.4% of targets against Green Bay have gone to tight ends. That's not the most in the league, but when you adjust for opponent, it becomes the most in the league. That's because New Orleans didn't target their tight ends that much in week 2 when they did a lot in week 1 against Green Bay. Regardless, if the 49ers put up 26 or 27 points, Jimmy G is going to have something to do with it. It's similar to weeks 1 and 2 where he scored 15 and 20 fantasy points. And the nice part is Green Bay's offense should be able to move the ball. That's going to force Jimmy Garoppolo to throw it deep more frequently than he has, or hopefully, because right now he's second from the bottom in the NFL in deep ball rate. The second super deep sleeper in week 3 that I've got, Van Jefferson. He's another guy that I talked about in the 15 transactions episode this week, but he's basically been getting just as much run as Robert Woods in this offense this year. I really like the Rams passing attack in this matchup against Tampa Bay. The Bucs are tough to run on. We know that. And they're also a very good team. That forces opponents to throw the ball a lot against Tampa Bay. On the season, they're the only team that's faced 100 or more pass attempts. They faced 106. And here's the other thing. Sean McVay has faced the Buccaneers twice over the last 2 years. And over these 2 years, the Buccaneers have been good against the run. In those games, McVay's offenses have passed the ball 68 and 51 times. They've run the ball 20 and 11 times. That's a total of 119 pass attempts and 31 rush attempts. A pass rate that high is not simply due to game script. You guys might remember, but one of those games was a serious shootout. But even in that contest, the Rams were really pass heavy to start the game. So I love the Rams passing attack in a game with a high over-under. Of course, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods are better bets than Van Jefferson. But Jefferson has the peripherals to work this week. If you want a deep tight end option, you could look at Jacksonville. James O'Shaughnessy is out for the Jags, and in week 2, the tight end with the most routes run for the Jags was Luke Farrell. Now, I'm not totally sure that we see a repeat there. Jacob Hollister has been on the practice squad in Jacksonville, and he's got more experience than Farrell does. Hollister actually has 9 career games with 6 or more targets. But here's why we should be interested. The Jags have been really pass heavy because they're bad. They have a 2.63 pass to rush attempt ratio this year. And that ratio is not going to get significantly smaller this week as a 7.5 point home dog against Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. If one of those guys is running routes, he has a shot to see volume. And Trevor Lawrence is throwing it deep at the highest rate in the league. That gives Farrell or Hollister, and I'm going to bet on Hollister if he's active, that gives them the potential to be relevant on just 2 or 3 catches. Again, we have to learn more about whether or not Jacob Hollister will be active or not. But if he is, I think that he could be viable. Now, I usually only go with 3 of these types of plays, 3 players in this tier, but I want to talk about the Detroit pass catching group. Tyrell Williams is out again this week. In week 2, Quintez Cephas ran the most routes at wide receiver for Detroit. He also had a 20% target share leading the wide receiver group. So he's probably the play among the wideouts on that team. But I want to give rookie Amon-Ra St. Brown a shout. He ran the second most routes for Detroit at wide receiver against the Packers, and over 87% of his snaps this year have come from the slot. Naturally, that's by far the most on the team. He's their slot guy. So far this year, only Chicago has seen a higher percentage of their targets go to that area of the field than Baltimore. And that's a continuation from last season. In 2020, Baltimore was 7th in that category. This is sort of like the Hunter Renfrow play from last week, but it's like Diet Hunter Renfrow. There's a lot less stability and it's even deeper. Don't start Amon-Ra St. Brown over players with locked-in roles. I just wouldn't be surprised if he has a decent game. Now it's time to find players who are rostered in about 70-75% of Yahoo leagues who you could consider benching this week. Let's start with running backs, and I'm going to go to Myles Gaskin. I'm just naturally worried about the Dolphins' offense and their ability to move the ball with Jacoby Brissett. That's going to hurt the playmakers on that team. And Gaskin's peripherals aren't anything to write home about. He's seen 42% of Miami's running back rushes, and he has a 14.7% target share. Now, that target share should keep him competitive in RB2 territory this week in PPR formats. But some of you might have better options this week, especially if you need upside. That's the best way to describe Gaskin at such a lifeless position in fantasy football. He's fine. Ronald Jones is still rostered in 75% of leagues. And while I can understand the allure a little bit this week given the game has such a high over-under, it's hard to like him. In shallow leagues, he's a drop candidate. So far this year, Jones has seen a third of the Bucs running back rushes and under a 4% target share. Even if you want to just remove that week 1 game where he fumbled, it's still not great. He saw just 35% of the team's running back rushes in week 2. So no, don't start Rojo this week. Damian Harris is another one who I think could have a down week. Like, I totally understand if you can't bench a player like Harris or Gaskin because running back is not very deep. But Harris is still a relatively one-dimensional fantasy back. He's seen 4 targets in 2 games, giving him a 6% target share. And while that's better than what I expected entering the year, it's still not a whole lot with James White taking on that role still. And the Patriots get the Saints. The game has just a 41.5 point over-under, and New Orleans has been good at stopping the run over the last 3 years plus. They've ranked no worse than 8th best in rushing yards allowed since 2018. And after facing Aaron Jones and Christian McCaffrey, they still rank in the top 10 in rushing yards allowed to running backs. Again, I understand if you have to start Harris. He's just probably going to be touchdown dependent. And I don't want to bank on that in what could be a low-scoring game. Brandon Ayuk should not be started yet. He saw a couple of targets in week 2. That's great. But you can't throw a dude who has a 4% target share into your fantasy football lineup, even if the matchup is great. If Brandon Ayuk goes off, then awesome. You have Brandon Ayuk. He's back. But there's too much volatility to that situation to start him. And then there's Corey Davis. Davis had just 2 catches for 8 yards in a tough matchup against New England in week 2. And after that crazy preseason he had, all that volume he was seeing in the preseason, he now has a 17.4% target share in the Jets offense. That isn't even the top mark on the team. Braxton Berrios has a 26% target share. I don't think that's going to continue, but it's hard to trust this passing attack right now, especially in a tough matchup against the Broncos. And then my 2 streaming defenses this week, Carolina and Vegas. I talked about Vegas on Tuesday's 15 Transaction Show, and it's now official. They won't be facing Tua. With 2 relatively decent performances so far this year, I think they're going to be fine. And then Carolina's in a really good spot against Houston. They're not at home, but they're 7.5 point road favorites going up against a rookie quarterback, and it's a rookie quarterback who was drafted in round 3. In plus matchups this year, because it's all that Carolina's seen, they've ranked as the 6th and 5th best defense in weekly scoring. They have 10 sacks on the season to go along with 3 picks. They're a very, very good play in week 3. I think I would prefer them to Vegas at this point. Although Vegas is still a very, very strong option. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. We got one more show this week, the mailbag episode. I'll talk to you tomorrow.